Hey, it's Greg here with MaritimeGardening.com. You know, I do a lot of videos on how to build gardens, and of course, I get a lot of questions on how to build them. And I thought I'd do a compilation video here, narrated with footage from a number of my different videos, with everything sped up, where I show how to do a rock-bordered garden, a Hugelkutur garden, a Ruth Stout garden, and the classic garden that's the most common in my garden, the 4 foot by 8 foot. Garden about 6 inches high, made by 2 by 6. So have a watch, stick around for the ride, and let's see how this all goes together. Alright, so let's get started. The rock bordered garden. So I love rock bordered gardens because rocks last forever, they hold heat, they actually preserve moisture underneath them. Your plants tend to love hugging the rocks. Various amphibians that sort out your pest problems, like toads and stuff like that, salamanders, they like the rocks. So there's a lot to be said for rocks. So how do you build a rock bordered garden? Well, you make a shape using rocks that is pleasing to you, that works with your garden. And then you can do one of two things. You can either break up the soil like I'm doing here. I mean, this has already been mulched for a season. That's the easiest way to do it. But even if you weren't going to do that, I would just put cardboard down. Let's say this was all grass. I'd put the rocks down. I'd put cardboard or leaf bags or something like that down, and then put the rocks down the shape. So I'd put the leaf bags or cardboard around the total area, and the rocks would be on top of the cardboard. I'd cover that whole thing with cardboard. And then I put some sort of soil. I'm using well-composted horse manure here because I can get it for free, but if you can't get that, just buy some topsoil. And here I'm putting some screened compost on top of the horse manure. Generally speaking, if you're using horse manure, it's very weedy, but if you can put about 2 or 3 inches of soil on top of the horse manure, you really won't get, I mean, I can only speak to my experience, but you won't get any weeds, or you get very few weeds. Very few of the kind of weed seeds that are in the horse manure can find their way through a few inches of soil, or maybe the soil doesn't reach the sort of temperature that the kinds of seeds that are in horse manure will germinate. So that's how I do it. You could just buy bags of soil or get some delivered or whatever. Anyway, you smooth that over the top and you've got a garden that's ready to go. Make sure you keep your soil covered with some sort of mulch all the time, and that'll feed your soil and the organisms in it, and you really won't need to do much to perpetuate that garden. Just keep covering it with mulches, and it'll all work out just fine. At least that's my experience anyway. So that's the rock bordered garden. Another thing about the rocks, if I didn't mention before, is that they gather heat, so it's a great way to do it. Now here is a video I did a while ago. I'm going to put links to all of these at the end of this video. This is the Hugelkutur garden, or a different way of doing it, sort of like a raised bed Hugelkutur. But the general principle is, and you don't necessarily need a box, you can just make a mound. But you dig a trench in the ground. I think this trench would have been about 12 inches deep. You can go deeper, but for me, once you get about 12 inches deep, the soil isn't much use. It just becomes more and more and more clay the deeper you go. Once you get to about 12 inches where I am, the soil is actually like a gray color. And it's probably lots of minerals in it, but there's, it's just not the best sort of stuff. So this is just a wild field, and I put down a box, and I started digging, and what you're doing is you're digging out all of that soil. I like to put it in containers like this because it just makes it easier to get the soil back in. And I mean, you can shovel it onto a tarp. There's different ways to do it, but this way you only have to shovel it once. And I got the container in the box with me because it's just easier to do all the shoveling, and it only takes a second to drag it out of the box. And now as I'm doing this, I'm sorting out various rocks and things I'm finding and so on. I mean, it's a bit of exercise, but with the Hugelkutur bed, the idea is you're going to fill this trench with various organic materials that will break down slowly over time, and as they're breaking down, the organisms that are breaking those things down, worms and smaller things, are going to distribute the nutrients from those things throughout your soil. So that's what it looks like. Kind of looks like a shallow grave. It actually feels like digging a grave. You always watch these mob movies where a couple guys in suits dig a grave. No. It's really hard, even if you're digging down 12 inches. So once you get the trench, you fill it full of rotten wood. And then if you got some, kitchen scraps, you throw that in there. You throw some leaves and organic various, you put rotten logs down, ideally rotten logs because they're charged up with nitrogen and stuff like that. And then just whatever yard waste you can find. I mean, I just gather bags of stuff that people put on the side of the road when I'm going to and from work. Here I am putting, this is a seaweed fresh from the beach. You can see it's got the sand hoppers. That's what those little things are, like fleas. That is seaweed fresh from the beach. Throw that in there because I just love seaweed and I can get it for free. There are lots of videos on seaweed. It's nutrient rich and it really heats the soil up, and everything just loves growing in seaweed. Great. Some reason when you plant potatoes with seaweed, it works really well. This was the fall when I built this garden here. So I put some hay on top of there, and this is, I think, a bit more seaweed I'm throwing on top of that. Okay, so I'm just putting all these different organic materials that break down, and now I'm putting the soil back on top so I can plant in the soil. Right, so this is just a great way of filling up a box without buying any soil. There's just nothing worse than buying dirt. I mean, that's just obscene. So here I've got this nice, beautiful raised bed. Now, I mean, I can say it's over a year now since I put that garden in, and the soil has dropped a good 6 inches. It's gone down. And here I am. This was fall, so I was just putting this thing, getting this thing ready, and leaving it for the winter sort of thing. But I'm putting about 8 inches or a foot, almost a foot of hay on top, and just leaving it like that to sort of set for the winter and further compost and further breakdown. And I had a beautiful, I think I grew onions in that bed the next year, and it worked out just great. Now here's an even easier way to build a garden called I call this the Ruth Stout approach. I'm using composted horse manure. You could use any sort of soil here. This is just a great way to claim a space. So I've got a piece of ground here. It's just a weedy area outside my garden enclosure with all kinds of weird weeds growing, grasses, dandelions, all kinds of strange things I don't even know what they are. And I'm just making a rough rectangle shape with about 3 inches of soil, and just enough soil to cover these potatoes. And I just love claiming new ground with potatoes. You put a bit of dirt down, you mow it really, really short, you put a bit of dirt down, you jam the potatoes in the dirt. You can see how I'm there's just enough soil here to cover the potatoes. And then I'm going to cover the whole thing with a ridiculous amount of mulch. And the potatoes grow and they put out a ridiculous amount of foliage. They choke out all the sunlight that is on the soil. And really the only thing that grows is potatoes. So here I am putting a whole bunch of, this is just spoiled stable hay from a horse stable. It's hay the horses just won't eat because it smells wrong, or they just don't like it, or for whatever reason. So you can usually get this for free. But you could put leaves on here, bags of leaves. I mean, there's lots of different things you could put on top. Anyway, you put all this hay on top, and the potatoes grow, and they choke out the weeds, and after a few months you've got lots of potatoes, and all the stuff that was growing in that space is basically dead. And I've got lots of videos following up the results from these 3 Ruth Stout beds. I was really happy with the way it worked. So that's another really, if you've got a new space you want to claim and you're running out of energy, just plant some potatoes there. They're really easy to store and they'll keep all winter. And you can never have too many potatoes because they store well. They're easy to store, and nothing like growing your own potatoes. They taste great. Now here's another kind of bed. I think this is the last one we're going to do, where I'm building a really simple, I mean, there's a kind of theme here. A lot of the things I'm doing, they're similar in a lot of ways. I was doing this in the fall. I love building beds in the fall because you can use semi-composted horse manure, and you don't have to worry about it too much because it can age over the course of the winter. So what I did here was I was just making a rectangle. So I got some ground here. I'm using a pickaxe to break the ground up a little bit, and I'm putting down some logs to just border the garden. I like to border my gardens, but I mean you don't have to do that. It's certainly not an imperative. And you don't have to use logs. You don't have to use anything. You can use rocks or whatever, right? But anyway, I've got logs here, so that's what I'm using. So I got a wild piece of ground with some weeds and stuff like that, and I'm just making a very simple rectangular shape using some logs. You could use bricks, you could use rocks, you could use lumber, whatever you want. I'm using pegs here to hold the logs in place. Again, you don't have to do that. There's lots of different ways you can do it. I find this is just the fastest, simplest, easiest way. And I'm just fitting those things into place. But I'm using a chainsaw, but you don't need a chainsaw. Anyway, so here I've got a rectangle, and I've basically that's 80% of the garden is done now. So I've got this basic frame, and here all I'm going to do is just break up the sod. And you don't have to do this, but you know, I find it depending on what you're going to grow. If you're going to grow up, it turns out I didn't even need to do this. I could have just put paper down here, and what I ended up doing is putting manure over this. But you don't have to break up the sod like I've done here. If you're going to plant a root vegetable like carrot or salsify, parsnip, then you need to break up the sod just to be sure that root vegetable can go down. But if you're planting something that's growing up above the soil, like a potato or a tomato or squash, where I've found that as long as you've got about 4 to 6 inches of good soil and a good mulch and that sort of thing, that plant will get along just fine. All the stuff that's underneath the soil will die, and it'll become, all that grass and those different weeds that are growing there, they've got roots into the ground. They'll all die from lack of sunlight once they're covered in some stuff, and that organic matter that made up those plants will break down and just become excellent soil. Or if you're feeling really energetic and you've had about 3 beers, you can go crazy with a pickaxe. And it doesn't take too long, so it really depends on what kind of mood you're in. Certainly if you're going to let it sit for a season, there's no need to do that. So all I'm doing here is throwing, I believe this is semi-composted horse manure. And I mean, using I can get, aged horse manure usually costs a bit of money, but semi-composted is usually pretty free. So I can get it, there's a stable just down the road where I can get that sort of stuff. And there's certain things you can plant in that and certain things you can't. So I mean, semi-aged horse manure as a general rule, I mean, I just did a video where I break this rule, but it's because I took a certain approach. But semi-composted horse manure, you would, generally speaking, you don't want to plant root vegetables like potatoes and carrots and stuff. There is a way to plant carrots and stuff if you I can't get into that here because I haven't got the time to discuss. Watch my most recent video if you want to see about that. If you put the horse manure underneath some non-manure type soil, you can get away with it. But anyway, things like tomatoes, squash, things like that, they grow just fine because the roots of the plant are in the manure. The manure isn't too strong for them. Horse manure is a very weak manure. It's the weakest of all the manures, so it doesn't damage the roots of those plants. So those plants will grow just fine in there. And so if you're unsure if your horse manure is too strong or not broken down enough, plant tomatoes or squash or something like that. Cucumbers, something that's not a root veg for a season. And that horse manure just continue to break down, continue to feed the soil organisms, and you'll get really great results with that crop. And then the soil will be black and beautiful compost for the following year. Right? So anyway, this is just me. Thought I'd show a picture of me standing in the middle of my garden. It looks really nice, showing off what a great bounty I'm getting from all these great gardens. But the point was just to give me some runway to finish off the video, and also to show the kind of results you can get. So I mean, those 4 different techniques, for the most part, I think like 95% of the garden beds I have in my garden were built using those different techniques. You don't have to put too much energy into it. You don't have to buy anything. You can just use, inputs that are easy to come by. Basically bags of garden waste that people throw at the side of the road on garbage day is all you need to build a beautiful garden. That and a little bit of a little bit of elbow grease and that sort of thing. If you love the outdoors and you like getting a little exercise and so on, you can chip away at these things. And every year my garden gets bigger, and I add new spaces, and I'm sure at some point I'll hit an upper limit on this, but I still haven't hit it yet. I'm 40, I'll be 47 in about a month, and there seems to be no upper limit to how big a garden can be. That's even if you're maintaining the whole thing by yourself, if you're using the no-till approach with a nice mulch and everything. So, I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, please like, share, subscribe. Check out my podcast, maritimegardening.com. And until next time, get out there, get at it, have fun in your garden, and thanks for watching.